Hey guys, tonight we're not just unwinding. We're stepping through a shimmering portal back to a time before your smartphone alarm rudely jolted you awake, before the concept of being 5 minutes late even existed. Imagine, if you will, a world utterly devoid of neatly segmented hours, a place where your daily schedule was dictated not by a digital clock, but by the sun's slow, deliberate crawl across the sky, by the grumble of your stomach, or perhaps by the urgent, insistent squawk of a particularly demanding chicken. You probably wouldn't survive a single week without Google Calendar, let alone a lifetime navigating such ancient ambiguities. It's a truly wild thought. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening, drop a comment with where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, not to a digital display, but to the soft, diffused light filtering through a gap in your simple dwelling. Is it dawn? Mid-morning? You have no idea. There's no snooze button, no gentle chime. Your body clock, honed by millennia of natural rhythms, is your only guide. You stretch, perhaps feeling the ache of a night spent on a hard mat, and you trudge out, greeted by the cool, crisp air. The sun is a faint promise on the horizon, painting the sky with muted purples and grays. You know, instinctively, that it's time to begin the day's work. But how much time do you have? And when exactly should you stop? This is the ancient challenge, the silent, pervasive problem that permeated every aspect of life before the invention of reliable timekeeping devices. You aren't just facing the inconvenience of missing a meeting. You're navigating a world where the very concept of a meeting time is an abstract, almost poetic notion. Imagine trying to coordinate a communal hunt with neighboring tribes. Meet us when the sun is halfway to its peak, you might say, gesturing vaguely towards the east. But what if it's a cloudy day? What if one tribe's peak is slightly different from another's, due to a mountain range or a particularly tall tree? You can practically hear the frustrated grunts and the eventual, awkward shuffling as everyone arrives at slightly different intervals, wondering if they've been stood up by a group of highly punctual, invisible squirrels. Your life is a constant negotiation with the sun. You learn to read the length of shadows, the position of the sun in the sky, the subtle shifts in light and temperature. When you're cultivating your crops, you know that planting too early might expose delicate sprouts to a late frost, and planting too late could mean missing the vital spring rains. But how do you mark those crucial, fleeting windows? You observe the budding of certain trees, the migration of birds, the appearance of specific constellations. These are your calendar, your clock, your very survival guide. It's a beautiful, intimate connection with nature, yes, but it's also incredibly imprecise and, frankly, exhausting. You're always guessing, always hoping you've interpreted nature's subtle cues correctly. It's like trying to bake a soufflé using only your gut feeling and the vague memory of a dream about a slightly risen cake. Consider the challenges of large-scale projects. You're building a massive monument, perhaps a pyramid or a grand temple. Hundreds, even thousands, of workers are involved. You need to coordinate their efforts, ensure that materials arrive when needed, and that shifts change without chaos. Without a standardized way to measure time, this becomes a logistical nightmare. Start work when the sun touches the highest peak. Your foreman might bellow, and finish when the evening star appears. But what if the evening star is obscured by clouds? Do you just keep working until you collapse? Or do you wander off, hoping no one notices you've clocked out early because your personal evening star just happened to be a particularly bright firefly? Historians still argue whether the incredible feats of ancient engineering were achieved through sheer, unyielding brute force and endless daylight, or if there were more subtle, yet still rudimentary, timekeeping methods at play that we've yet to fully understand. For most of ancient history, people operated on what we might call event time rather than clock time. You ate when you were hungry, you slept when you were tired, you gathered when the harvest was ready. Your day wasn't chopped into neat little hourly segments, but flowed with the rhythm of natural light and human need. This isn't to say there was no sense of time. Early humans, like many animals, possessed an innate circadian rhythm, an internal clock that dictated sleep-wake cycles and other biological processes. This is a mainstream historical fact. The human body naturally cycles through periods of activity and rest, influenced by light and darkness. But this internal clock, while fundamental, isn't going to tell you when to meet your friend for ancient coffee at 1/2 sunrise. Imagine trying to enforce laws or administer justice. If a crime occurred, how would you establish an alibi? I was definitely home when the sun was directly overhead, you might claim. But what if the witness says, no, it was clearly when the shadows were long, just before dusk. There's no timestamp, no definitive record. It's all subjective observation, leading to endless arguments and, presumably, a lot of very confused ancient judges who probably just wanted to go home and nap. Even rituals and religious ceremonies presented a challenge. Many ancient religions placed immense importance on performing rites at precise moments. Sunrise, sunset, the zenith of the moon, or specific seasonal solstices. Missing these crucial moments could, in their belief system, incur divine displeasure. Priests and astronomers became vital figures, meticulously observing the heavens, tracking the movements of celestial bodies, and essentially acting as the public timekeepers. They were the original Time Lords, except without the cool sonic screwdrivers. One quirky tidbit. Some ancient Egyptian temples were even aligned so that specific rays of sunlight would illuminate a particular statue or altar at an exact moment on the equinox or solstice, turning the entire building into a giant architectural calendar. This required incredibly precise astronomical observation, but still it was about marking a point in time, not measuring the flow between points. So you live in this world, a world of approximations and natural cues. You might use the length of a shadow cast by a stick, but that changes with the seasons and your latitude. You might use the emptying of a large bucket of water through a small hole, but the flow rate changes as the water level drops. You're constantly trying to pin down the elusive, slippery beast that is time, to give it shape and form, to make it predictable. You crave a way to measure its passage consistently, reliably, even when the sun is hidden or the stars are obscured. You dream of a device that could tell you unequivocally that it's time to call it a day, or that your bread has been baking for precisely the right duration, or that your friend is, in fact, officially late for that ancient coffee date. This yearning for precision, this deep human need to quantify the unquantifiable, is what ultimately drove the ingenious inventions we're about to explore. It's a journey from vague guesswork to the very first whispers of mechanical accuracy, born from the simple, relentless drip of water. Imagine, if you will, a world where your alarm clock isn't chirping beside you, and your smartphone isn't even a glimmer in some silicon wizard's eye. You're not just waking up to a sunbeam, you're waking up to the very concept of time being a bit, well, fluid. You see, before those delightfully noisy mechanical gears started whirring and clicking their way into our lives, humanity faced a rather existential problem. How do you even know what time it is when the sun decides to clock out for the night, or when a particularly grumpy cloud decides to play permanent peekaboo with the sky? You trudge through your ancient day, perhaps a farmer. Your life dictated by the sun's grand arc. Dawn breaks. You're up. The sun hits its zenith, it's roughly midday, time for a quick bite. Maybe. And then, as the shadows lengthen and the sun dips below the horizon, you're left in a rather delightful, yet utterly frustrating, temporal void. It's night. But how much night? Is it the deep, dark middle? Or is it almost time for that first whisper of pre-dawn light? You literally have no way of knowing, short of consulting a very patient owl. For millennia, humans relied on these celestial cues, like a cosmic game of Simon Says with the sun and stars as the only players. You'd mark the passage of the day by the length and direction of shadows, perhaps using a simple stick stuck in the ground, a gnomon if you're feeling fancy. It works, sure, when the sun is out and you have an unobstructed view. But try telling your ancient self, be at the market in 3 hours, when those 3 hours might be swallowed by an unexpected cloudburst or, more reliably, the entire duration of the night. It's like trying to bake a cake using only the light from a disco ball, theoretically possible, but wildly imprecise. The fundamental limitation was that these methods were entirely dependent on external, often unpredictable, natural phenomena. You couldn't exactly pull out your pocket sundial during a moonless, overcast night and expect it to tell you when your shift at the local pottery workshop was supposed to start. And forget about scheduling a secret rendezvous with your beloved under the cover of darkness. You'd both just end up milling about in the general vicinity for what felt like several geologic eras, perpetually wondering if the other one was just running a bit late. This inherent unreliability led to a profound human drive, the quest for an independent internal timekeeper. We needed something that didn't care if it was raining cats and dogs, or if the stars were hiding behind a celestial duvet. We yearned for a consistent, measurable flow of time, a steady beat that transcended the whims of the weather and the rotation of the earth. It's a bit like desperately needing to know if your favorite ancient reality show, Keeping Up with the Sumerians, was starting soon, but having no concept of a TV schedule. The struggle was real. Think about the daily rhythms that began to emerge in early civilizations. You have priests needing to perform rituals at specific, astronomically determined moments, like the rising of certain stars. You have soldiers needing to coordinate movements for battle, farmers needing to manage irrigation schedules, and merchants needing to arrive at the bustling marketplace at a consistent time to catch the best trade. You can't run an empire on ish and maybe. You need a bit more precision than just observing when the local rooster decides to announce breakfast. One of the most mainstream historical facts about this era is that the concept of hours, as we understand them, was not fixed. Early civilizations, like the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians, did indeed divide the day and night into 12 parts each. However, these were what we call seasonal hours or unequal hours. This means that the length of an hour during the day was longer in summer and shorter in winter, because the daylight period was simply divided into 12 equal parts, regardless of its total duration. The same applied to the night. So, if someone told you to meet them in 2 hours, you'd have to mentally calculate how long that particular day's 2 hours would be. It's like if your coffee shop kept changing the size of a small coffee based on the barista's mood that morning. Utter chaos, I tell you. This fluctuating definition of an hour made precise scheduling a nightmare. You couldn't just say, the meeting is at the 4th hour, because the 4th hour of a summer day was a vastly different span of time than the 4th hour of a winter day. This led to a kind of temporal elasticity that, while perhaps charmingly organic, was utterly useless for coordinating anything beyond a casual chat by the well. Imagine trying to explain to your ancient boss why you were late. But sir, the 4th hour was particularly brief today, due to the equinox. Not a great excuse even back then. So, the need for a constant, unchanging unit of time became paramount. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about the very fabric of society. As communities grew, as trade networks expanded, and as administrative tasks became more complex, the limitations of sun-based timekeeping became glaringly obvious. You couldn't send a messenger across a vast empire with instructions tied to a fleeting shadow. You needed something that could provide a reliable metric, day or night, rain or shine. There were, of course, some rather quirky or fringe tidbits of early non-celestial timekeeping attempts. Some cultures experimented with measuring time by the burning of marked ropes or candles. You'd light a rope with knots tied at specific intervals, or a candle with lines etched into its side, and as the flame consumed the material, you could roughly estimate the passage of time. It was a bit like watching paint dry, but with the added anxiety of wondering if a gust of wind might prematurely extinguish your temporal marker. And let's not even get started on the fire hazard. Oh dear. The 3rd hour just set my curtains ablaze. Not ideal. These methods were crude, often inaccurate, and certainly not something you could rely on for public timekeeping or complex scheduling. They were more for personal, short-term needs like timing how long you could hold your breath underwater, which, let's be honest, probably wasn't a common ancient pastime. Historians still argue whether these very early, rudimentary methods like burning ropes or specific incense sticks, which were also used in some Asian cultures, were truly widespread or merely niche solutions for specific tasks, like timing meditations or guard shifts. The general consensus points to their limited utility for broader societal needs. The quest for something truly reliable, something that offered a consistent, measurable flow, continued. The desire was for a mechanism that could mimic the steady, inexorable march of time itself, independent of external light or weather. Something that would just flow. This yearning for an internal, self-contained time-telling device was the driving force behind the innovations that would soon follow. People were tired of being perpetually in the dark, both literally and figuratively, about what time it was. They yearned for a steady rhythm, a predictable pulse that would bring order to their days and nights. They needed something that just kept going, tick-tock, or rather drip-drip, or perhaps grain-grain. They were ready for the next big thing in timekeeping, something that would transcend the limitations of the sun and stars and bring a new level of precision to their lives. You settled deeper into your imaginary, plush armchair, the scent of ancient dust and quiet discovery hanging in the air. You've journeyed with us through the early, often frustrating, attempts to grasp time, squinting at the sun and craning your neck at the stars. But now, you're about to witness a shift, a quiet revolution born not from grand celestial mechanics, but from something far more humble, something you might casually dismiss as a leaky faucet on a Tuesday morning. We're talking about water, my friend. Just water. And its delightfully dependable, gentle drip. Imagine, if you will, the profound simplicity of it. You're living in a world where the sun is your only real clock, a giant, fiery, and frankly, rather uncooperative timepiece that vanishes at night and hides behind the occasional moody cloud. You need to know when to start dinner, when to wake the goats, because, let's be honest, goats are terrible alarm clocks. Or perhaps, when that super important ancient pottery baking session is precisely half done. You've tried counting sheep, counting your blessings, counting the grains of sand slipping through your fingers, but none of it offers the consistent, reliable rhythm you crave. Then, one day, perhaps while fetching water from a spring, or observing a crack in a clay pot after a heavy rain, you notice it. A drop, then another, and another. Drip, drip, drip. So utterly mundane, so utterly unremarkable, that for millennia people probably just grumbled about the mess. But someone, somewhere, at some point had a spark. A tiny, flickering thought, perhaps fueled by a lack of sleep and too much thinking about time. What if, they mused, probably to the exasperation of their long-suffering spouse, what if that consistent drip could be time? It's the kind of idea that seems utterly obvious in hindsight, like realizing you can put wheels on luggage. But for the ancient mind, it was a revelation. Because here's the magic. Water under constant pressure, or flowing from a large enough reservoir, tends to flow at a remarkably consistent rate. Not perfectly, mind you, we'll get to the ancient headaches of achieving true consistency later, but consistent enough to be a game changer. You didn't need the sun. You didn't need clear skies. You just needed a vessel, some water, and a tiny hole. And voila! You had a rudimentary, self-contained, and most importantly, uninterrupted measure of time. Think about the sensory experience of this discovery. You might have closed your eyes, listening to the rhythmic plink of each drop hitting a small basin below. Drip, plink, drip, plink. It's the original ASMR. Really, a soothing, predictable cadence that whispers of order in a chaotic world. You could almost feel the seconds ticking away, palpable and real, for the very first time, independent of the external world. No more guessing if it was mid-morning-ish or almost afternoon maybe. You had a tangible, audible, and visible progression. This simple observation, this quiet epiphany about water's gentle drip, formed the absolute bedrock for humanity's first truly accurate timekeepers. Before this, accuracy was relative. Accurate meant good enough for farming, or good enough not to miss the tribal council meeting. But with water, you could begin to divide the day and night into genuinely uniform segments. You could say, we will meet when the water in this vessel has completely emptied twice. And everyone, assuming they had a similar vessel, would know exactly what you meant. It was the birth of standardized time, albeit on a very local and rudimentary scale. This was a monumental leap from the sundial, which, let's be honest, was a bit of a fair-weather friend. Sundials were fantastic for a sunny afternoon picnic, but utterly useless if a rogue cloud decided to photobomb your timekeeping efforts, or, when the entire planet rotated away from its star. The water clock, even in its most basic, dripping form, offered continuity. It worked in the pitch black of night, in the murky gloom of a storm, or even, theoretically, deep inside a cave, should you happen to be an ancient cave-dwelling time enthusiast. The Egyptians, those ever-resourceful pioneers of ancient innovation, are widely credited with being among the earliest civilizations to harness this principle, developing rudimentary water clocks as far back as 1500 BCE. Imagine a temple priest, perhaps a bit of a night owl, needing to know precisely when to perform a specific ritual in the wee hours before dawn. A sundial was clearly out, but a pot with a small hole carefully calibrated to empty over a set period would have been an absolute godsend. This mainstream historical fact underscores just how early and how essential this concept became. It wasn't just a quirky experiment, it was a practical necessity. Now, about that quirky tidbit, historians still argue whether the initial discovery of water's potential for timekeeping was a singular eureka moment or a gradual evolution across different cultures. But imagine the very first experiment. Perhaps it was an accidental observation, as mentioned, from a leaky jar. Or maybe it was a deliberate, almost playful attempt. Picture an ancient artisan, perhaps bored during a particularly dull council meeting, idly poking a hole in a clay cup, filling it with water, and then watching, mesmerized, as the drops fell. And then, a thought. What if I poke another hole, slightly bigger? Or use a different shape? This wasn't science as we know it, but it was the very first whisper of empirical observation in timekeeping. It was the spark of curiosity that led to millennia of innovation, all from a simple drip. The beauty of this concept, this fundamental understanding of water's gentle drip, lies in its universality. You don't need complex mathematics or intricate astronomical charts. You just need to observe. You fill a vessel, you watch it empty. You notice that if you make the hole smaller, it empties slower. If you make it bigger, it empties faster. If you use a wider vessel, it takes longer. These were the foundational lessons, the very first steps in calibrating time. It was the ultimate low-tech solution to a high-stakes problem, proving that sometimes the most profound insights come from the most unassuming sources. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Far from it. The very first attempts at these water-drip timekeepers would have been hilariously inaccurate by modern standards. You'd probably set your alarm for sunrise, only to wake up to a still dark sky and a disgruntled rooster wondering why you're up so early. Or worse, sleep through half the day. The flow rate would change as the water level dropped, for instance, slowing down as the pressure decreased. It's the ancient equivalent of your phone battery draining and slowing down its performance, but without a convenient charger. But the principle was sound. The idea was revolutionary, and it was this initial, humble concept that a steady, measurable flow of water could consistently mark the passage of time that truly laid the groundwork for everything that came after. Without the drip, there would be no advanced Clepsydra, no intricate gears, no public time. Just a lot of squinting at the sun and a whole lot of missed appointments. So, let's give a quiet round of applause to the humble water drip, the unsung hero of early timekeeping. Imagine, if you will, the profound simplicity of it all. You're not scrolling through TikTok, you're certainly not checking your smartwatch for the time, and the very concept of a digital display would seem like an alien dream. Instead, you find yourself transported to an ancient world, a time when the sun, for all its celestial glory, was a rather unreliable timekeeper once it dipped below the horizon or decided to play hide-and-seek behind a stubborn cloud. So what did humanity, in its infinite wisdom and boundless need for order, turn to? Water. Just water. You pick up a simple, unadorned clay bowl. It feels smooth, cool against your fingertips, perhaps a little gritty from millennia of dust. It's not much to look at, certainly not the kind of thing you'd proudly display on your mantelpiece next to your collection of artisanal coffee mugs. But this humble vessel, with a tiny, carefully bored hole near its base, represents a monumental leap in human ingenuity. This, my friend, is the primordial ancestor of all our modern clocks, the very first iteration of what we now affectionately, or perhaps sleepily, given the hour, call the Clepsydra. The word Clepsydra itself just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It's Greek, of course, derived from kleptein, meaning to steal, and hydor, meaning water. So, literally a water thief, which, if you think about it, is a rather charmingly poetic way to describe something that slowly, steadily steals away moments of time. No dramatic ticking, no sudden chimes, just the quiet, relentless pilfering of seconds, minutes, and hours. You fill the bowl with water, perhaps from a nearby well or a cool earthenware jug. As the water level rises, you notice it, a tiny, almost imperceptible trickle beginning to escape from the hole. Drip, drip, drip. It's the original slow-motion movie, the world's first truly analog timer. This basic design, often referred to as an outflow clepsydra, was incredibly straightforward. You fill it to a marked line, and as the water drains, the decreasing level inside the bowl indicates the passage of time. Think of it like a very, very slow coffee maker that also tells you how long it's been brewing since you started. Except, for time. Early versions of these water clocks were often found in places like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Imagine an Egyptian priest, perhaps a touch more serious than our current relaxed demeanor, carefully watching the water level drop, knowing that his precise timing of rituals depended on this simple, yet revolutionary, device. Mainstream historical fact alert. The earliest known water clock dates back to ancient Egypt, around the 16th century BCE, discovered in the tomb of Amenhotep I. It was a bowl-shaped vessel with a small hole near the bottom and markings on the inside to indicate hours. Simple, effective, and probably a lot less stressful than trying to guess the time by the length of shadows cast by palm trees. Now, you might think, well, that's just a fancy bucket with a leak, isn't it? And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But from this basic premise, the designs began to evolve, driven by the sheer human need for greater accuracy and longer measurement periods. The initial problem, which you'll notice almost immediately if you stare at your dripping bowl long enough, is that the rate of flow isn't perfectly consistent. When the bowl is full, the pressure of the water is higher, and it drips faster. As the water level drops, the pressure decreases and the drips slow down. It's like trying to get a consistent stream from a leaky faucet when the water pressure in your house keeps fluctuating. Annoying, right? So, the clever folks of antiquity didn't just throw up their hands and declare water clocks a bust. Oh no, they started experimenting with the shape of the vessel. Instead of a simple, straight-sided bowl, you begin to see designs that are conical or perhaps have slightly bulging sides. The idea was to compensate for that changing pressure. By shaping the vessel in a particular way, they could try to ensure that the volume of water dripping out per unit of time remained as constant as possible, even as the overall water level decreased. It was like ancient hydroengineering, without the fancy CAD software or the endless meetings about project scope. Then there was the inflow clepsydra, a fascinating inversion of the concept. Instead of watching water drain out, you watch it fill up another vessel. Imagine a large reservoir of water, and a smaller, empty container placed beneath it. A steady stream or a series of drips fills the smaller container. Marks on the inside of this container would then indicate the passage of time as the water level rose. This had some advantages, particularly for measuring specific intervals, or for systems where you wanted to collect the timed water for other uses. Plus, it just felt neater, somehow watching something fill rather than empty, like watching a bathtub fill up, but with more existential purpose. The earliest of these clepsydras, both inflow and outflow, were still very much manual devices. There was no automatic reset, no digital display screaming, "Time's up." You had to be there, present in the moment, to refill the outflow clepsydra or empty the inflow one. It was a commitment. You couldn't just set it and forget it unless forgetting it meant you completely lost track of time, which kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the primary use of the very earliest clepsydras was for practical timekeeping or more for religious and ceremonial purposes, where precise, measured intervals were crucial for rituals. Perhaps it was both, a glorious blend of the sacred and the utterly mundane. As you trace the evolving designs, you might notice the pottery becoming finer, the markings more precise. Sometimes, these early vessels had not just simple lines, but engraved symbols or even small figures that would become visible as the water level dropped, adding a touch of ancient pizzazz. It wasn't just about utility. There was an aesthetic to it, a subtle beauty in the slow revelation of time. Quirky tidbit. Some early clepsydras had different markings for day and night hours, because in many ancient cultures, the length of an hour actually varied with the seasons. A night hour in winter might be much longer than a night hour in summer, as the night itself was longer. Try explaining that to your boss when you're late for work. Sorry, the winter hours just expanded. You know how it is. So, you see, from a basic leaky bowl, the Clepsydra began its long, fascinating journey of transformation. It wasn't yet the marvels of gears and alarms we'll touch upon later. This was the foundational period, the Proto-Clepsydra era, where the simple act of watching water flow became the bedrock of regulated time. It was a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of order, even in the quietest, most unassuming forms. And as you gaze at that dripping vessel, you can almost hear the soft whisper of ancient voices, coordinating their lives to the steady, unhurried rhythm of water. Imagine, if you will, the gentle caress of the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A beautiful sight, yes, but for our ancient ancestors, it was also the harbinger of a profound temporal void. You see, after a day spent diligently tracking the sun's arc across the sky, using the shadow cast by a simple stick or a grand carved gnomon on a sundial, you suddenly find yourself plunged into an abyss of temporal uncertainty. The sun dips below the horizon, and just like that, your most reliable timepiece, indeed, your only widely available timepiece, simply vanishes. Poof, gone. It's like your smartphone battery just hit zero, and suddenly you're cut off from the very fabric of scheduled existence. You're left in the dark, quite literally wondering, is it midnight yet? Or just really, really late? This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a fundamental challenge to the rhythm of life. During the day, you could glance at the sundial, see the creeping shadow, and roughly gauge the hour. Perhaps you were a Roman citizen, strolling through the Forum, and you'd see a grand public sundial, like the one that was famously erected in Rome in 293 BCE, a gift from the consul Lucius Papirius Cursor. It was a marvel of its time, telling everyone, in no uncertain terms, when it was time for the midday meal or when the markets would close. But once the sun packed up its bags and went to bed, that magnificent public clock became nothing more than a very expensive, very decorative stone. Silent, useless, and it wasn't just the night that played havoc with the ancients' attempts to measure time. Picture this. You wake up, eager to start your day, perhaps to meet a friend at the market or prepare for an important ceremony. You step outside, ready to consult your trusty sundial, only to be met by a sky the color of a dishwater, heavy with clouds, perhaps even a gentle, persistent drizzle. The sun, your celestial timekeeper, is completely obscured. The shadow, your essential indicator, is nowhere to be found. It's like trying to find your car in a parking lot during a thick fog. You know it's somewhere, but good luck pinpointing it. Suddenly, your day, which you had hoped to orchestrate with some semblance of precision, dissolves into a hazy, indeterminate block of time. You're left squinting at the sky, muttering under your breath, "Oh, come on, sun, just give me a peek. I need to know if I'm late for my chariot pooling appointment." Because, let's be honest, even ancient folks probably had issues with punctuality. This wasn't just about knowing if it was time for dinner. It impacted everything. Farmers needed to know when to wake their laborers before dawn to maximize daylight hours for planting or harvesting. Soldiers on watch needed to know how long until the next shift change, lest they fall asleep on duty and risk a rather stern talking to from their centurion or worse. Priests needed to know the precise moment for religious rituals, many of which were tied to specific hours, not just the general day or night. Imagine trying to hold a grand festival that required a specific ritual at the third hour of the night, when you literally had no way of knowing when the third hour of the night was. It's a recipe for chaos, or at least a lot of very confused deities. The limitations of sundials were particularly acute when it came to the concept of unequal hours, which was prevalent in many ancient civilizations, including the Romans. Rather than dividing the day into fixed 60-minute hours like we do, they often divided the period of daylight into 12 hours and the period of darkness into 12 hours. This meant that an hour in summer, when daylight was long, was considerably longer than an hour in winter, when daylight was short. A sundial could, with a good design, track these unequal hours during the day. But when the sun vanished, so did the very definition of that fluctuating hour. You couldn't just say, well, an hour is an hour, because it simply wasn't. It was like trying to measure a distance with a rubber ruler that stretched and shrank with the seasons. Think about the psychological impact of this temporal uncertainty. In our modern world, we are utterly reliant on the constant, unwavering tick-tock of clocks. We schedule our lives down to the minute, meetings, appointments, even our favorite streaming shows. The idea of not knowing the time for hours on end, especially during crucial periods like the night, feels almost unfathomable. For the ancients, it meant that activities that needed to transcend the day-night cycle, like baking bread that needed constant temperature monitoring, or medical treatments requiring precise intervals for medication, were incredibly challenging. How do you tell someone to take their ancient herbal remedy every 4 hours, when you can't even tell if 4 hours have passed since sundown? You'd probably just end up saying, take it when you feel like it's been a while, I guess? Which, for a medical professional, is perhaps not the most reassuring advice. This isn't to say people were completely lost. They used other, less precise indicators. The crow of a rooster signaled dawn, undoubtedly. The position of certain stars could give a rough sense of the progression of the night, if the sky was clear. But these were crude, imprecise methods, utterly lacking the consistency and reliability that daily life increasingly demanded. Imagine trying to coordinate a citywide event based on the sound of a particularly enthusiastic rooster. Right, everyone, meet at the amphitheater. When Cedric the rooster decides to have his morning crowing concert, it's charming, yes, but not exactly a blueprint for efficient urban planning. The sheer frustration of these temporal blind spots must have been immense. You go to bed, and you know it's night. You wake up, and you know it's day. But what happened in between? How much of the night had passed? How long did you have until sunrise? These questions, so easily answered by a quick glance at your bedside clock today, were monumental riddles for our ancestors. This constant, nagging uncertainty about the passage of time during the night and on overcast days wasn't just an annoyance. It was a barrier to more complex societal organization and personal planning. Historians still debate the precise impact of these temporal blind spots on daily ancient life, wondering if people simply adapted with a kind of communal shrug, or if the lack of precise, continuous time truly constrained their societal development, pushing them to seek more innovative solutions. The need was palpable. The sun, for all its life-giving warmth and guiding light, was a fickle timekeeper. It abandoned you in your darkest hours and hid behind a veil of clouds when you needed it most. This profound limitation, this vast, unmeasured expanse of time, was the driving force behind the invention of something truly revolutionary. Something that could keep ticking, or rather, dripping, regardless of whether the sun was blazing high or the moon was a mere sliver in a cloudy sky. Something that promised to fill those gaping holes in the fabric of measured time. And that, my sleepy friend, is where the story of the water clock truly begins to flow. You've imagined the ancient world. You've seen the dawn of the water clock, the Clepsydra. A simple bowl with a hole, dripping its way into history. It feels revolutionary, doesn't it? A tangible, measurable slice of time, unbothered by the sun's whims or the moon's absence. You picture the steady, rhythmic drip, 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 a soothing soundtrack to the passage of moments. But then, a subtle unease begins to settle in. That perfectly steady drip you imagined? Well, that's where our journey into the nitty-gritty of ancient timekeeping gets a little squishy. Because, as much as we adore the elegant simplicity of the Clepsydra, its very design held within it the seeds of its own inaccuracy. You see, the primary, most stubborn hurdle facing early water clock designers was deceptively simple: maintaining a truly consistent flow rate. Sounds easy, right? Just drill a tiny hole, fill the container, and let gravity do its thing. But gravity, while reliable, is also a bit of a stickler for rules, and one of those rules is that the pressure of a fluid depends directly on the depth of the fluid above it. This, my dear listener, is where the trouble begins. Imagine your beautiful, brand new water clock. It's a tall, straight-sided cylinder, full to the brim with clear, cool water. As the water level is high, the pressure at the bottom, where your tiny outflow hole is at its maximum. The water gushes out with a satisfying, robust flow. You mark your first hour, feeling rather chuffed with your ingenious device. But as the water drains, the level inside the container steadily drops. And as that level falls, the pressure pushing the water out of the hole also falls. This means that the water doesn't keep gushing. Oh no, it slows down, trickles. It eventually, sadly, just drips with less enthusiasm, like a Monday morning after a long weekend. This isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a fundamental flaw. If the flow rate isn't constant, then the amount of water that drains in, say, 1 hour at the beginning of the cycle is significantly more than the amount that drains in 1 hour towards the end. Your carefully etched marks on the side of the Clepsydra, meant to indicate equal intervals of time, become wildly inaccurate. An hour measured when the clock is full might be, in reality, only 45 minutes, while an hour measured near empty could stretch to 75. It's like trying to time a race with a stopwatch that decides to speed up or slow down depending on how many laps have been run. Utter chaos. You'd never know if you were truly on schedule or just living in a time warp. And it wasn't just the ever-decreasing pressure that threw a wrench into the works. Oh no! The ancient world had plenty of other delightful little surprises waiting to mess with your meticulously planned timekeeping. Think about the humble outflow hole itself. To achieve a slow, steady drip, this hole had to be remarkably small. And small holes, as you might imagine, are prone to getting clogged. A tiny speck of dust, a stray leaf fragment, a bit of algae growing on the inside of the container, because, let's be honest, ancient water wasn't exactly purified and chlorinated. Or even a microscopic insect could partially or fully block the orifice. Suddenly, your already variable flow rate becomes even more unpredictable, stuttering and stopping like a hesitant ancient Roman trying to remember his lines. This was a common headache, requiring frequent cleaning and careful maintenance, turning the water clock attendant into a sort of early, very patient plumber. Then there's the subtle yet significant impact of temperature. You might not think much about it, but water's viscosity, its resistance to flow, changes with temperature. Colder water is thicker, more viscous, and will flow more slowly through a given opening than warmer water. So, if your Clepsydra was sitting outside, exposed to the changing temperatures of the day and night, or the seasons, its accuracy would fluctuate. A chilly morning meant your hours would drag, while a warm afternoon would see them zip by. Imagine trying to coordinate a grand public ceremony when your clock is essentially a mood ring for the weather. Is it noon yet? You ask. Depends, replies the clockmaster. Is it feeling particularly brisk out? And let's not forget the silent thief of water, evaporation. Over longer periods, especially in hot, dry climates, a noticeable amount of water could simply vanish into the air. This would, of course, lower the water level faster than just the outflow alone, further skewing the pressure and making the clock run fast without actually changing the flow rate through the hole in the way the pressure drop did. It's a subtle distinction, but both contributed to the overall lack of reliability. It was a constant battle against the elements, requiring diligent refilling and careful observation. This inherent inconsistency was a major headache, especially for applications where precision truly mattered. Take, for instance, the famous use of clepsydras in ancient Athenian courts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. These water clocks, often called clepsydra, from kleptine to steal and hide or water, literally water thief, were used to time speeches. Each litigant or speaker was allotted a certain amount of water, and when their portion had drained, their time was up. This was meant to ensure fairness and prevent endless rambling, a concept we could perhaps still use in some modern meetings? Wouldn't you agree? But imagine the frustration if the time you were allotted varied wildly depending on whether your speech came at the beginning or end of the clock cycle, or if the court was particularly warm or cold that day. Your Honor, I object. My water is clearly flowing faster than the prosecution's. You can almost hear the ancient lawyers squabbling. This brings us to a quirky tidbit: the challenge of manufacturing these tiny, precise holes. In an age before advanced machining, creating an identical, perfectly smooth, and consistently sized orifice was incredibly difficult. Early craftsmen likely used bronze or other metals, and the process of drilling and refining such a small, critical component would have been painstaking. A slightly irregular hole, or one that wore unevenly over time, would further contribute to erratic flow. Historians still debate whether the ancient artisans truly understood the precise physics governing these flows, or if their improvements were more the result of trial-and-error empiricism passed down through generations. Was it a deep scientific understanding or just really, really good tinkering? The evidence suggests a blend of both, with practical observation leading the way. So, you see, while the concept of the water clock was brilliant, the practical execution was riddled with challenges. The dream of a perfectly steady, unwavering flow was constantly undermined by the laws of physics, the imperfections of ancient craftsmanship, and the vagaries of nature. These inherent hurdles meant that the early clepsydras, while a monumental leap forward from sundials, were still far from the precise timekeepers we take for granted today. They were a valiant first step, but they cried out for ingenious solutions to tame their wild, inconsistent flow. And that, my sleepy friend, is a story for another time. You've just peered into the ancient world, a place where time, that slippery eel, was notoriously difficult to pin down. You've seen the basic bowl with a hole, the clepsydra in its most primitive form. And you've probably already spotted the glaring flaw, haven't you? You're a smart cookie, even when your eyelids feel a bit heavy. Imagine pouring a glass of water, but the stream starts strong, and then, as the glass empties, it just sort of peters out, like your motivation on a Monday morning. That, my friend, was the fundamental headache for early clockmakers: variable pressure. You see, the speed at which water flows out of an opening is directly related to the pressure pushing it out. And what creates that pressure? The weight of the water above the hole. So, as the water level in your time-telling vessel dropped, the pressure diminished and the flow slowed down. This meant that the first hour measured by your clepsydra might be perfectly accurate, but the second hour, with less water above the hole, would be deceptively longer. And the third even longer still. You can practically hear the ancient complaints now. My appointment was for the third hour, but I swear it felt like 2. It was like trying to measure a marathon with a stopwatch that secretly slows down every mile. Utter chaos for anyone trying to run an empire, or just figure out when dinner was ready. So, what do you do when the very thing you're relying on, the steady drip of water, decides to take a leisurely stroll instead of a brisk walk? You put on your thinking cap, or perhaps, in ancient times, your finely woven linen head wrap. The challenge was immense, requiring not just observation but a deep, intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics, centuries before anyone even dreamt of equations for such things. You had to feel the water, understand its whims. One of the first, more intuitive attempts to combat this maddening inconsistency involved a clever manipulation of the vessel's shape. Imagine a simple cylindrical pot. As the water level drops by, say, an inch, a certain volume of water leaves the pot. But what if the pot wasn't a cylinder? What if it was, instead, a cone? Specifically, a cone that was wider at the top and tapered down towards the bottom where the outlet was. You can almost feel the smooth, tapering clay as you run your fingers along its imaginary surface. The genius here, subtle as it might seem, lies in the changing surface area. In a cylindrical vessel, every inch of vertical drop removes the same volume of water. But in a conical vessel, as the water level drops, the surface area of the water at that new, lower level is smaller. This means that for each subsequent inch the water level drops, a smaller volume of water is actually leaving the vessel compared to the previous inch. Confused? Think of it like this. If you have a giant funnel, the top part holds a lot of water for a small drop in height, but the narrow bottom part holds very little water for the same drop in height. The idea was that by making the vessel narrower as the water level decreased, you could, to some degree, counteract the decreasing pressure. The reduced volume draining per unit of height helped to maintain a more consistent flow rate over time, or at least make the rate of decline in flow more linear and predictable. It didn't achieve perfect constancy, not by a long shot. It was more like trying to flatten a slightly curved road by just making it slightly less curved. You still had a curve, but it was a much more polite, less dizzying curve. It was a clever workaround, a hack, if you will, for a problem that was truly bugging everyone who wanted to know what time it was. You might even call it a conundrum solved. Ahem. Yes, I'll try to keep the jokes less conical. But while conical shapes offered an improvement, they weren't the ultimate solution. The true breakthrough, the aha moment that probably made ancient engineers jump up and down and spill their perfectly measured wine, came with the development of what we now call the constant head device, or the overflow mechanism. This was a game changer, the historical equivalent of inventing the internet, but for timekeeping. Imagine, if you will, not one but two vessels. You have an upper reservoir, perhaps a large tank, continuously filled with water. This water then flows down, through a pipe, into a second, smaller chamber positioned below it. This second chamber is the crucial bit. It has the little hole at the bottom from which the time-measuring water drips out. But crucially, this second chamber also has an overflow spout positioned near its top. Now, picture this: water from the upper reservoir flows into the second chamber. It flows in faster than it can drip out of the small time-measuring hole at the bottom. What happens to the excess water? It simply spills out of the overflow spout, back into a collection basin, or perhaps even back up to be recirculated by some clever ancient pump. You can almost hear the gentle gurgle of the excess water, a soothing sound of precision. The magical result of this setup is that the water level in that second, time-measuring chamber remains absolutely perfectly constant. Because water is continuously flowing in, and any excess immediately spills out, the pressure pushing water out of the time-measuring hole at the bottom never changes. Ever. It's like having a bathtub with a constantly running tap and an overflow drain. The water level in the tub stays exactly the same, no matter how much water you pour in, within reason, of course. Don't try to flood your bathroom. This was the moment humanity truly began to tame the wild flow of water for timekeeping. No more guessing, no more wildly inaccurate hours. You now had a consistent, relentless drip, a heartbeat of water that truly measured equal intervals of time. This ingenious design meant that a single drop of water, whether it was the first or the last from the time-measuring chamber, represented the exact same unit of time. It was the ancient world's version of setting the atomic clock. Mainstream historical fact alert. The brilliant mind often credited with perfecting this constant head Clepsydra, bringing unprecedented accuracy to timekeeping, was Ktesibios of Alexandria, a Greek inventor and engineer who lived in the 3rd century BCE. His work laid the foundation for much more complex water clocks. Historians still argue whether the concept of the true constant head Clepsydra originated solely with the Greeks or if earlier Egyptian designs laid the groundwork for this pivotal innovation. It's a fun little debate, like arguing whether the best way to make toast is in a toaster or under the grill. The toaster, obviously, less chance of charcoal. Beyond Ktesibios, the application of these overflow mechanisms spread. You find evidence of increasingly sophisticated water clocks, often incorporating these constant head principles, in Hellenistic Egypt and later throughout the Roman Empire. They weren't just practical. They were symbols of technological prowess. Imagine walking through an ancient agora or forum and seeing a grand, ornate water clock, its steady drip a testament to human ingenuity. It was a public display of mastery over nature, a quiet, watery boast. Now for a little something extra, a quirky tidbit to tickle your brain before you drift off. Did you know some very early Clepsydra designs, particularly in ancient Egypt, might have experimented with a thin layer of oil on the surface of the water? Not for flow regulation, mind you, but to reduce evaporation. Imagine your ancient timekeeper not only measured the hours but also, inadvertently, served as a very slow, very wet, and probably not very fragrant oil lamp. It's a charming thought, isn't it? A multi-purpose time-telling device, though I imagine the light output was roughly equivalent to a firefly with a headache. These ingenious flow solutions, from the clever but imperfect conical shapes to the truly revolutionary constant head overflow mechanisms, represent a monumental leap in human history. They transformed timekeeping from a rough estimation into a precise science. They allowed for the development of more complex water clocks that would eventually incorporate gears, alarms, and even automated figures, but we'll get to those marvels later. For now, just appreciate the quiet genius of a steady drip, made possible by a simple, yet profound, understanding of water and its pressure. You're witnessing the birth of true precision, one perfectly consistent drop at a time. You've seen how early water clocks, the humble Clepsydras, wrestled with the challenge of keeping time with a consistent drip. It was a good start, a monumental leap from just watching the sun. But imagine, if you will, the ancient equivalent of a smart home enthusiast looking at their basic drip timer and thinking, "This is fine, but it could be more. It needs gears. It needs an alarm. It needs pizzazz." And so you arrive at the golden age of Hellenistic ingenuity, where the Greeks and later the Romans took the simple water clock and turned it into something truly astonishing. Picture yourself wandering through the bustling intellectual hub of ancient Alexandria, a city where minds like Ktesibios were tinkering away, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with water, air, and a little bit of bronze. Ktesibios, often hailed as the father of pneumatics and hydraulics, was no stranger to making water do incredible things. He wasn't just fixing the flow rate. He was envisioning a whole new level of complexity. You see, the earlier water clocks, for all their charm, were a bit like your first flip phone, functional but lacking in features. You checked the water level, maybe note a mark, and that was that. But what if the clock could tell you the time? Or even wake you up? This is where the magic of gears enters the scene. Now, when you think of gears, your mind probably jumps to intricate clockwork mechanisms, all tiny cogs and springs. But long before the mechanical clock as we know it, the Greeks were already mastering the art of the gear train. Ktesibios and others like him realized that the steady, continuous descent of water in a clepsydra could be harnessed to do more than just lower a float. That float, connected to a rod, could turn a series of toothed wheels, gears. Imagine the subtle, rhythmic whereas one gear meshes perfectly with another, transferring motion, changing speed, and multiplying force. It's like the ancient world's first analog computer, a marvel of mechanical engineering that still makes you slightly misty-eyed if you appreciate such things. Why gears? Well, for one, they allowed for the creation of a proper clock face. Instead of just a moving float on a vertical scale, the float could now drive a pointer around a circular dial, much like the hands of a modern clock. This was a huge leap in readability and convenience. No more craning your neck to see the water level. Now you had a clear, instantaneous display of the hour. You could glance at it, nod sagely, and impress your friends with your newfound punctuality. Oh, is that the third hour? Must be time for my philosophical debate on the nature of reality, or perhaps just a quick nap. But the genius didn't stop there. The Greeks were obsessed with making things move, making them automatic. These gears weren't just for pointers. They were for automata. Imagine a water clock that, as the hours passed, would slowly reveal a series of miniature figures, perhaps a tiny Hercules performing a labor, or a little owl turning its head. Or, even more practically, the gears could be used to adjust the timescale throughout the year. You see, ancient hours weren't fixed. They varied with the length of the day. A summer hour was longer than a winter hour. A truly advanced clepsydra, using cleverly designed gears and cams, could compensate for these seasonal variations, ensuring that each hour it marked was indeed 1/12 of the daylight period, regardless of the solstice. This was mind-bendingly sophisticated, akin to your phone automatically adjusting for daylight saving, but with significantly more bronze and significantly less battery life. Now, let's talk about the alarm system. Because what's the point of knowing the time if you can't be roused from your slumber or reminded of an important appointment? The earliest alarms were wonderfully simple yet effective. One common method involved a float rising with the water level until it reached a certain point, triggering a mechanism. Perhaps it would tip a small tray of bronze balls, which would then clatter down a chute into a resonant gong. Clang! There's your wake-up call, ancient style. No snooze button here, just the harsh reality of bronze on bronze. You'd probably wake up in a slight panic, wondering if the fates themselves were calling your name. Another ingenious alarm involved the siphon. As the water level rose, it could eventually flow into a siphon tube, which would then rapidly drain a smaller reservoir. This sudden rush of water could, in turn, activate another mechanism. Perhaps it would cause a small figure to move, or even blow a whistle or a small trumpet. Yes, you heard that right, ancient water clocks could literally toot their own horn. Imagine being woken up by a tiny, water-powered horn solo. It's certainly more dramatic than your phone's gentle morning sunshine alarm tone. This was their version of smart home tech, just with a lot more plumbing and a lot less Wi-Fi. One particularly quirky tidbit about these advanced clepsydras comes from the descriptions of Philo of Byzantium and Heron of Alexandria, who detailed machines that could perform various actions. Some were said to make sounds like birds, or even release a small, pre-measured amount of water for a ritual hand-washing at a specific hour. Imagine a water clock that not only tells you the time, but also dispenses a mini fountain for your ablutions. It's the ultimate in ancient multitasking, proving that people have always loved gadgets that do more than one thing, even if that thing is just a fancy water dispenser. When you move to the Roman period, you see less of the pure, groundbreaking invention in terms of the fundamental principles of gears and alarms, and more of the practical application and refinement on a grander scale. The Romans, masters of engineering and large-scale construction, adopted and adapted the sophisticated Greek clepsydra designs. They were less about theoretical breakthroughs and more about making things bigger, more robust, and more widely useful. They built impressive public water clocks, incorporating the gear mechanisms and alarm systems perfected by the Greeks. These weren't just for the elite. They became features of public life, marking hours in forums, baths, and even military camps. While the Greeks laid the intellectual groundwork for these complex mechanisms, the Romans ensured they were built to last and disseminated throughout their vast empire. They likely improved manufacturing techniques, used better materials, and focused on the durability required for public installations. Historians still argue whether the Romans significantly innovated the internal gear trains or simply excelled at mass-producing and scaling up existing Greek designs. But what is undeniable is their role in making these advanced timepieces a common sight in urban centers. They took the intricate, almost artisanal Greek concepts and engineered them for the masses, or at least, for the public spaces where the masses gathered. So, you see how the simple concept of dripping water evolved from a crude bowl into a mechanical marvel. The introduction of gears transformed the water clock from a passive indicator to an active, automated machine capable of displaying time with precision, adjusting for seasonal changes, and even rousing you from your sleep. These weren't just time-telling devices. They were the apex of ancient automation, showcasing an incredible understanding of hydraulics, pneumatics, and mechanical engineering. They represent a pivotal moment in the history of timekeeping, demonstrating humanity's relentless drive to not just measure time, but to master it, to bend its flow to our will, and perhaps, just perhaps, to get a few extra minutes of sleep before that important meeting. You find yourself now, not in a quiet workshop or a scholar's study, but standing in the bustling heart of an ancient city. Imagine the cacophony. The shouts of merchants hawking their wares, the clatter of chariots on cobblestones, the murmur of 1,000 conversations. In this vibrant, sprawling metropolis, a new kind of time emerges, not just for the individual, but for everyone. You see it rising above the rooftops, a monumental structure, often grand and ornate, a testament to human ingenuity and the growing need for collective order. This is where the gentle, consistent drip of water graduates from a personal timekeeper to a public spectacle, becoming the very pulse of urban life. Think about it. Before these colossal public water clocks, how did an entire city know when to start the day? When the market opened, or when the courts convened? It was a chaotic symphony of guesswork and local arrangements. But now you gaze upon a magnificent clepsydra, perhaps nestled prominently in the agora, the forum, or even within the sacred precincts of a temple. It isn't just a clock. It's a statement. It's a declaration that the city, the state, the very fabric of society, is now operating on a synchronized rhythm. The power to tell time, once a private luxury or a priestly secret, has been democratized, though perhaps democratized isn't quite the right word when it's controlled by the elite. Still, the information is now public. You watch as people gather near its base, their eyes occasionally flicking upwards, not just out of curiosity, but out of necessity. The steady, almost hypnotic sound of dripping water, perhaps amplified by clever acoustic designs, becomes a constant backdrop to the city's hum. It's like the ancient world's version of a giant digital display in Times Square, except instead of flashing advertisements, it's just time. And it's far more elegant, you must admit. No annoying pop-up ads for sandals or chariot polish. These public water clocks, often towering structures, were far more complex than the simple bowls you've imagined. They were architectural marvels, sometimes adorned with intricate carvings, statues, and even astronomical displays. The most famous example, which you absolutely must visualize, is the Horologion of Andronikos Kerestes in Athens, often called the Tower of the Winds. You can still visit it today, standing proudly in the Roman Agora. This octagonal marble tower, built around the 1st century BCE, wasn't just a sundial on its exterior. It housed a sophisticated water clock inside, ensuring time could be told even on those famously cloudy Athenian days or, more importantly, through the long, dark nights. Imagine the feeling of walking past this monumental structure, knowing that its internal mechanism, powered by a constant flow of water from a distant spring, was meticulously tracking every hour for the entire city. Truly brings a sense of awe, doesn't it? It's like the ancient equivalent of a smartwatch for an entire civilization, only a lot less portable and significantly more imposing. The functions of these public clocks extended far beyond merely telling the hour. They served as official timekeepers, regulating the rhythm of public life. You can picture it. A gong sounding, triggered by the clock's mechanism, signaling the opening of the city gates, or perhaps a trumpet blast announcing the start of legal proceedings in the forum. Imagine being a Roman citizen, perhaps a bit tardy, hustling towards the courthouse, ears perked for that telltale signal. Oh, Jupiter! The clock has struck the 5th hour. I'm going to miss the opening arguments on that land dispute. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of, I'm late, for a very important date. For religious ceremonies, the precision offered by these clocks was invaluable. Priests could ensure rituals were performed at the exact auspicious moment, a matter of grave importance for divine favor. For the military, changes of the guard could be synchronized, ensuring no lapses in vigilance. Even the humble baker knew when to light his ovens, or the market vendor when to pack up their wares for the day, all thanks to the grand Clepsydra in the town square. It created a communal heartbeat, a shared understanding of the passage of time that unified the diverse activities of a bustling ancient metropolis. Now, maintaining such a colossal and complex machine was no small feat. You can imagine the dedicated team, the ancient clockmakers, the engineers, the water managers, who would have been responsible for its constant upkeep, ensuring a steady, reliable water supply, cleaning out sediment, repairing worn parts, and recalibrating the mechanisms would have been a full-time job, probably with terrible hours. Oh, the public clock stopped again? Guess I'm pulling an all-nighter with a bucket and a sponge. It wasn't like you could just swap out a battery. These were living, breathing machines, dependent on the consistent flow of nature and the careful hand of human ingenuity. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some of these public clocks weren't just about marking time. They were also about showing off. Imagine a public water clock in ancient Alexandria, not only telling the time but perhaps featuring little mechanical figures that moved or made sounds on the hour, or even an automated miniature procession that emerged from a hidden compartment. These wasn't strictly necessary for timekeeping, but they certainly added to the spectacle and the civic pride. It was the ancient equivalent of adding LED lights and a fog machine to your clock tower simply because you could. They were often symbols of a city's wealth, its technological prowess, and the sophistication of its governing body. A city with a magnificent, accurate public clepsydra was a city that had its act together, a city to be respected. The emergence of public time also highlights a fascinating shift in human perception. Before, time was often perceived cyclically, tied to the sun's arc or the moon's phases. With public clocks, time became increasingly linear, segmented, and quantified. It was no longer just sunrise or midday, but the 2nd hour or the 9th hour. This standardization had profound implications for commerce, law, and administration. Imagine trying to coordinate a large-scale public project, like building a new aqueduct, without a shared understanding of time. It would be like trying to organize a flash mob where half the participants are running on moon time and the other half are just guessing. However, historians still argue whether the common folk truly grasped the precise divisions of these public clocks, or if they just relied on general signals like the sound of a gong for broad time markers. Was it really about knowing it was exactly 7:17 a.m., or just knowing that the market opens soon? It's a good question. For the illiterate masses, the visual cues and audible signals might have been more important than the exact hour marks on a dial. It was probably more about the event that the clock signaled than the exact numerical time itself. Still, the underlying mechanism was one of precision, even if the reception was more approximate. The sheer scale and engineering required for these public water clocks were staggering. They often involved complex systems of reservoirs, siphons, and regulating devices to ensure a constant head of water pressure, which was crucial for accuracy. You can almost hear the soft, internal gurgle of the water flowing through hidden pipes, a continuous, unseen engine powering the city's temporal rhythm. It was a symphony of hydraulics, a testament to the ancient world's understanding of fluid dynamics, all to make sure you didn't miss your appointment with the oracle. So you stand there watching the crowds ebb and flow around this monumental timekeeper. You see the scribes glancing up from their scrolls, the soldiers adjusting their helmets, the children playing, momentarily distracted by the gentle drip of water or the chime that marks another passing hour. The public water clock isn't just a machine. It's the beating heart of the ancient city, orchestrating its daily life, setting its pace, and unifying its people under a shared, precise understanding of time. It's truly amazing how a simple drip of water could achieve such grand, societal impact, isn't it? And it's all thanks to clever design and a city's need to know, collectively, what time is it? Anyway, you've journeyed through the clever simplicity of the early water clock, the humble Clepsydra, and you've seen how ancient minds wrestled with the challenge of a consistent drip. But now you lean back, perhaps with a soft sigh, as we glide into the truly astonishing realm of ancient engineering, the complex mechanical marvels that transcended mere time-telling. Imagine, if you will, not just a bucket with a hole, but an entire miniature world, powered by water, ticking away with astounding precision and spectacle. You see, for some ancient engineers, simply knowing the hour wasn't enough. They didn't just want to tell time. They wanted to show time, to make it a performance, a grand public display of human ingenuity. These weren't just clocks. They were ancient Rube Goldberg machines, intricate ballets of floats, gears, levers, and counterweights, all orchestrated by the relentless, patient flow of water. You might even call them the original smart homes, just without the Wi-Fi and the constant need to update your operating system. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic gurgle of water filling a hidden reservoir, the gentle clack-clack-clack of wooden gears slowly turning, and then, perhaps, a sudden, delightful ping as a small bronze ball drops onto a waiting cymbal. These weren't your grandma's quiet mantel clocks. These were the showstoppers of their day, drawing crowds and dropping jaws. They were the equivalent of today's hyper-complex Swiss watches, but instead of fitting on your wrist, they often occupied an entire room, or even a public square. You can picture the bustling marketplace in ancient Alexandria, where Ktesibios, a brilliant inventor often hailed as the father of pneumatics and hydraulics, was busy pushing the boundaries of what a water clock could do. While we touched on his innovations earlier, his true genius lay in his ability to automate and integrate. He didn't just create a steady flow. He designed mechanisms that translated that flow into actual readable time. This is where the magic really starts. He was the first to widely employ gear trains in his water clocks, allowing for the display of not just hours, but also minutes, and even the movement of astronomical bodies. Imagine the sheer mental gymnastics required to conceive of such a system without modern CAD software or even a decent screwdriver set. You'd probably need a lot of strong coffee, or at least a very patient apprentice to fetch it. His most sophisticated clepsydras featured a float that rose steadily in a water tank, and this float, in turn, drove a pointer that moved across a graduated scale. But here's the kicker. To account for the varying length of hours throughout the seasons, remember how the ancient world used temporal hours that changed with daylight. Ktesibios devised a brilliant solution. He could use a system of movable scales or even complex cams that would adjust the rate at which the pointer moved, ensuring accurate time-telling regardless of whether it was the longest day of summer or the shortest of winter. This wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. This innovation, the use of gears and automated seasonal adjustment, represents a mainstream historical fact that cemented Ktesibios' legacy as a true pioneer in horology. But the ambition didn't stop at mere time display. Oh no, the ancient engineers were the ultimate showmen. Their water clocks became intricate automata. You might see a small figure of a person emerge from a doorway to mark the hour, or a tiny bird dip its beak into a basin of water. Some clocks would release small bronze balls, one for each hour, into a waiting receptacle, creating a delightful cascade of metallic pings. It was like an ancient version of a pinball machine, except instead of points, you got the time, and maybe a small sense of wonder. Fast forward 1,000 years or so, and you find yourself in the Islamic Golden Age, where the art of mechanical engineering reached astonishing heights. This is where you truly marvel at the complex mechanical marvels. Think of figures like Al-Jazari, a brilliant polymath from the 12th century, whose work reads like a blueprint for an entire theme park of hydraulic wonders. His book, The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, is a treasure trove of designs, many of which were powered by water. One of his most famous creations, and one you absolutely must visualize, is the elephant clock. Picture it. A magnificent, life-sized elephant, upon whose back sits a dazzling array of mechanisms. It's not just a clock, it's a moving sculpture. You see a small, gilded castle, a serpent, a bird, and even a figure of a man. The heart of this beast, its true timekeeping soul, was a large water-filled basin hidden inside the elephant. A float inside this basin would slowly descend, pulling a string that, through an ingenious series of pulleys and levers, activated the various automata. Every half hour, for instance, a bird would chirp, and a small figure would emerge from the castle to drop a ball into a serpent's mouth. The serpent would then tip forward, depositing the ball into a vase, which would then trigger a cymbal-striking figure. Imagine the soft splash of the water, the almost imperceptible movement of the float, then the sudden, delightful whirring as gears engage, followed by the gentle clink of the ball, the whisper of the serpent moving, and finally, the clear, resonant dong of the cymbal. It was a symphony of time, a meticulously choreographed sequence of events. And here's a quirky tidbit about Al-Jazari. He was known not just for the complexity of his machines, but also for his attention to detail and, some historians suggest, a touch of playful secrecy. He sometimes included what appear to be deliberately hidden mechanisms or slightly misleading descriptions in his drawings, almost like ancient Easter eggs for future engineers or perhaps just to guard his intellectual property. It's as if he was saying, "Yes, I'm brilliant, but you'll have to work a bit to figure out all my secrets." It makes you wonder if he ever just sat back, watched his creations, and thought, "Nailed it." These advanced water clocks weren't just about telling time. They were about demonstrating power, knowledge, and prestige. They graced royal courts, public squares, and grand libraries. They were status symbols, technological marvels, and educational tools all rolled into one. For instance, some clocks integrated astronomical displays, showing the movement of the sun, moon, and even constellations, turning a simple time teller into a miniature planetarium. You could gaze up and see the cosmic dance unfold, all powered by a gentle stream of water. The sheer understanding of physics, hydraulics, and mechanical principles required to design and build these machines is mind-boggling. They had to account for friction, water pressure, the weight of components, and the precise timing of numerous interconnected actions. It was an analog computer, calculating time and triggering events with astonishing accuracy for its era. Historians still argue whether some of Al-Jazari's more ambitious designs were ever fully constructed and operated perfectly, or if they remained mostly theoretical blueprints, awaiting a future where manufacturing precision could match the genius of the design. But even as concepts, they reveal an engineering prowess that was truly ahead of its time. You can almost feel the cool, damp air near one of these ancient giants, the subtle scent of water and aged wood, the gentle hum of its internal workings. It's a testament to human curiosity and the relentless drive to understand, measure, and even orchestrate the very fabric of time. These magnificent, automated water clocks weren't just instruments. They were living sculptures, whispering the hours with drips and clicks, a mesmerizing blend of art and science that continues to inspire awe even today. You've journeyed through the intricate world of water clocks, marveling at the ingenuity that harnessed the steady, relentless drip of H2O to mark the passage of hours. You've seen the sophisticated engineering, the clever solutions to inconsistent flow, the public displays of time in bustling ancient forums. It's been quite the aquatic adventure, hasn't it? But now, as the sun dips below the horizon in our historical reverie, and the water in our metaphorical clepsydras begins to feel a little damp and demanding, you might find yourself longing for something a little less high maintenance. Perhaps something you don't have to constantly refill, worry about freezing in winter, or splash all over your toga. And so, we pivot. You turn your gaze from the glistening, bubbling complexities of water towards something altogether different, yet equally mesmerizing in its simplicity. The humble, often overlooked, but profoundly effective Sandglass. Imagine, if you will, stepping away from the grand public squares with their towering, ornate water clocks, and into a quieter, perhaps more contemplative space. You might be in a scholar's study, a ship's cabin, or even a monastic cell where the need for timekeeping was just as pressing, but the practicalities of a large, flowing water system were, well, less than ideal. The very idea of using sand to measure time feels almost intuitive, doesn't it? It's like someone, tired of their bucket and whole water clock springing a leak or evaporating too quickly, just sighed, looked at a pile of sand, and thought, what if? It's a beautifully elegant concept born from a seemingly mundane observation. Sand, when given the chance, flows. It doesn't splash, it doesn't freeze, and it certainly doesn't try to grow algae. It just flows. And it does so with a surprisingly consistent rhythm, a quiet, almost meditative cascade of tiny grains. You can practically hear the soft, whispery rustle as it trickles from one bulb to another, a sound that, if you listen closely enough, might just lull you into a state of contented historical introspection. Or maybe that's just the ASMR effect kicking in. Consider the fundamental difference. With water, you're dealing with a fluid that changes density with temperature, evaporates, and requires a constant, regulated supply. It's a bit like trying to measure time with a leaky garden hose. You can do it, but you're going to get wet and frustrated. Sand, on the other hand, is solid. Each grain, an independent little timekeeper, patiently waiting its turn to descend. This inherent solidity offers a distinct advantage, a much greater immunity to environmental factors that plague water clocks. No more frantic dashing to refill your Clepsydra because the sun decided to get particularly enthusiastic that day and evaporate half your precious time-telling liquid. No more waking up in the middle of a frosty night to discover your water clock has turned into a rather unhelpful block of ice, effectively pausing time until spring thaw. With sand, you simply turn it over, and gravity, that ever-reliable master of ceremonies, takes over. The transition to sand wasn't necessarily a grand technological leap, but rather a parallel innovation, a different path to the same destination: accurate time measurement. While the Clepsydra evolved into complex, geared marvels, the Sandglass maintained a charming, almost defiant simplicity. You're not looking at a network of pipes and floats here. You're looking at two glass bulbs, connected by a narrow neck, containing a carefully measured amount of sand. That's it. It's the minimalist's dream of a time-telling device. It's the kind of invention that makes you think, why didn't I think of that? Probably followed by, because I was too busy trying to figure out how to make water flow uphill, obviously. Now, before you imagine someone just grabbing any old beach sand and stuffing it into a couple of bottles, let's inject a little historical nuance. The effectiveness of a Sandglass hinges on the sand itself. Couldn't be too fine or it would clump. Too coarse and it wouldn't flow smoothly. Imagine trying to measure time with gravel, not exactly precise. So, the early makers of these devices would have needed to source or prepare sand that was just right. This often involved using very specific materials like finely powdered marble, eggshell, or even lead oxide, which were carefully sieved and sometimes even baked to ensure dryness and consistent flow. It's a quirky little tidbit, isn't it? The idea that your ancient Sandglass might have been filled with pulverized eggshells, making it not just a timekeeper, but also a testament to someone's incredibly patient breakfast routine. The exact origins of the Sandglass, much like many ancient innovations, are shrouded in a bit of historical mist. While water clocks have clear lineages stretching back to ancient Egypt, the Sandglass seems to appear somewhat later in the historical record, with its widespread use becoming more evident in medieval Europe. However, historians still argue whether the sandglass was an independent invention that arose in different cultures, or if it slowly evolved from earlier, less sophisticated sand-based timing devices, or even if it was inspired by observations of water clocks. There's no definitive aha moment recorded, no ancient patent application for the gravitational granule time teller. This lack of a clear genesis makes the sandglass all the more intriguing, almost as if it just emerged, fully formed, from the collective human need for a portable, reliable timepiece. You might wonder, why didn't sandglasses become as technologically sophisticated as water clocks, with their gears and alarms? Well, part of their appeal, and indeed their primary advantage in many contexts, was precisely their lack of complexity. They didn't need a water source, they didn't require constant maintenance beyond an occasional flip, and they were, crucially, portable. You could take a sandglass on a journey, something that was considerably more challenging with a multi-part, water-filled Clepsydra. Try bringing a public water clock on your next camping trip. You'd probably need a team of oxen and a very patient park ranger. The genius of the sandglass lies in its elegant solution to a fundamental problem. How do you create a consistent, measurable flow without relying on external forces beyond gravity? The answer, it turns out, is to use a material that flows consistently because of gravity, and then to contain that material in a way that restricts its flow to a predictable rate. The narrow neck connecting the two bulbs acts as the crucial choke point, regulating the passage of each grain of sand. It's not a pump, it's not a valve. It's just a carefully calibrated bottleneck. This simple design allows for a surprisingly high degree of accuracy for its time, especially for shorter durations. You're watching time literally pour from one moment into the next, a tangible representation of its relentless unidirectional march. Think of the sensory experience. You hold the cool glass in your hands, perhaps feeling the slight weight shift as the sand trickles down. You see the upper bulb emptying, a tiny desert forming at the bottom, growing steadily. There's no whirring, no clicking, no digital display. Just the silent, steady descent of countless tiny particles, each one a miniature marker of time's passage. It's almost hypnotic, isn't it? The kind of thing you could stare at for hours if you weren't trying to measure hours, which, ironically, is what it's for. It reminds you that sometimes the most profound solutions are also the most straightforward. While water clocks were busy trying to out-engineer the elements, the sandglass simply embraced them, harnessing the most universal force of all, gravity. It's like the difference between a supercomputer and a really well-designed abacus. Both do the job, but one just feels a little more grounded. And this grounding, this simplicity, is what made the sandglass such a compelling alternative. It wasn't about public display or grand pronouncements of time, not initially anyway. It was about personal utility, about measuring specific durations in a world that was slowly but surely becoming more organized and time-conscious. Imagine a cook in a medieval kitchen needing to boil an egg for a precise amount of time, or a monk needing to time his prayers, or a sailor needing to track his watch at sea. For these needs, the cumbersome, stationary water clock was impractical. The sandglass, however, was a perfect fit. It represented a shift towards portable, personal timekeeping, a concept that would eventually lead to the watches and phones you carry today. It's a mainstream historical fact that the sandglass, or hourglass as it's often called, became an indispensable tool for maritime navigation, allowing sailors to track time at sea far more effectively than any other portable method available for centuries. Without them, charting courses and estimating distances would have been infinitely more challenging, leading to a lot more "are we there yet?" from the crew. So, as the last grains of sand settle in the lower bulb, you realize that this seemingly simple device is anything but trivial. It embodies a different philosophy of time measurement, one that prioritizes portability, resilience, and a quiet, consistent flow. It's a beautiful counterpoint to the splashing, gurgling, and sometimes temperamental world of water clocks, offering a dry, dependable alternative that would carve its own, significant niche in the annals of timekeeping history. And it's all thanks to a few glass bulbs, a narrow neck, and the humble, yet endlessly fascinating power of flowing sand. All right, you've just spent a good chunk of time pondering the intricate dance of water, gears, and clever overflows, haven't you? You've imagined ancient engineers squinting at their clepsydras, trying to coax a consistent drip from a fickle liquid. Now, gently, let your mind drift from the splash and gurgle, and instead, listen for a new, almost imperceptible whisper. It's the sound of stillness, the quiet cascade of tiny, dry grains. Because now, you're turning your attention to the utterly charming, wonderfully straightforward, and blessedly low-maintenance sibling in the early timekeeping family, the Sandglass. Imagine, if you will, the sheer relief of stepping away from the temperamental nature of water. No more worries about evaporation, about algae growing in the reservoir, about the temperature affecting viscosity, or about the whole thing freezing solid on a chilly night. With a Sandglass, you simply flip it, and then you wait. It's the original set-it-and-forget-it timer, though to be fair, you do have to remember to flip it back. Otherwise, you're just left with a very pretty, very useless ornament, aren't you? Like a fancy, silent alarm clock that never goes off. The mechanics of a Sandglass are so disarmingly simple, you might almost feel a little silly for not having invented it yourself. You have two glass bulbs, typically pear-shaped or conical, connected at their narrow ends by a constricted neck. Inside, a carefully measured amount of fine, dry sand or sometimes other powdered materials, but we'll get to that, is sealed. Gravity, that ever-present, ever-reliable force, does all the work. When you invert the Sandglass, the sand in the upper bulb begins its slow, steady descent through the narrow waist, piling up in the lower bulb. The time it takes for all the sand to flow from top to bottom is the fixed interval of time the Sandglass measures. That's it. No moving parts to break, no water levels to monitor, no gears to jam. It's a beautifully elegant solution to a complex problem, distilled down to its purest, most elemental form. It's the timekeeping equivalent of a perfectly smooth, unblemished pebble, simple, yet profound. The consistency of the sand itself was paramount. You couldn't just scoop up any old beach sand. Oh no, that would be far too coarse, too inconsistent, perhaps even a bit damp. Imagine trying to time your important meeting with sand that keeps clumping up. You'd be late and probably covered in tiny grains, which isn't exactly a power move. Instead, the sand used in these early devices had to be meticulously chosen and prepared. It was often finely ground marble, powdered eggshell, or even metallic dust, sieved to ensure uniform grain size and then thoroughly dried. This meticulous preparation ensured a smooth, uninterrupted flow, guaranteeing the accuracy of the timed interval. Historians still debate the precise origin point of the Sandglass, with evidence suggesting independent development in various cultures, but its widespread adoption truly took off when people realized the sheer reliability of a consistent flow of dry, powdered material. It was a game-changer, albeit a very quiet one. Now, where did these humble, yet incredibly effective, devices find their purpose? The applications were as diverse as the grains of sand themselves. One of the most historically significant, and perhaps most romantic, uses was at sea, out on the vast, unpredictable ocean, where sundials were useless at night or under cloudy skies, and water clocks would slosh and spill with every roll of the waves. The Sandglass was an absolute lifesaver. It became an indispensable tool for maritime navigation and shipboard routine from the 14th century onwards. Sailors would use them to measure watches, the shifts of duty for the crew. A 4-hour Sandglass, for example, would be flipped every time the sand ran out, marking the passage of the watch. They also used smaller, shorter duration Sandglasses, often 30-second or 1-minute models, in conjunction with a chip log to estimate the ship speed. You'd throw a piece of wood, the chip, overboard, and as the ship moved, a knotted line attached to the chip would unspool. The number of knots that passed through a sailor's hand in a set time, measured by the Sandglass, would indicate the ship's speed in knots, a term we still use today. Imagine the quiet, rhythmic ritual on a pitching deck, the soft whisper of sand the only sound breaking the silence of the night watch. No wonder sailors developed such a deep, practical affection for them. But the Sandglass wasn't just for the high seas. You'd find them in the most mundane, yet equally vital domestic settings. In medieval kitchens, a Sandglass might be used to time the boiling of an egg, the baking of bread, or the stewing of a pot of lentils. You wouldn't want to overcook your pigeon pie, would you? The horror. And since not everyone had a personal chef constantly monitoring the culinary progress, a simple sandglass ensured consistency. It was the original kitchen timer, before the advent of those charmingly annoying wind-up egg timers that tick so loudly they make you jump. Beyond the galley, sandglasses entered the hallowed halls of justice and worship. In courts of law, they were sometimes used to limit the length of speeches by lawyers or the testimony of witnesses. Imagine a particularly long-winded barrister, mid-soliloquy, watching the last grains trickle down, knowing their time was up. A gentle visual cue, far less jarring than a gavel, and perhaps a little more humbling. In churches, sandglasses were employed to time sermons. Some churches even had large, ornate pulpit sandglasses, visible to the entire congregation, ensuring that the preacher didn't ramble on for too long. Or, conversely, ensuring they preached for at least the allotted time. It's a curious thought, isn't it? A silent agreement between the speaker and the listeners, mediated by sand. One can only imagine the collective sigh of relief, or perhaps disappointment, as the final grains settled. Even in education, the sandglass played a role. In early schools, they could be used to time lessons, study periods, or even exams. You can picture a young scholar, quill in hand, nervously watching the sand, knowing that when the last grain fell, their time to complete the Latin translation was over. It provided a clear, undeniable boundary, a physical representation of the fleeting nature of time, without the need for a stern master constantly checking a pocket watch. The beauty of the sandglass lay in its portability and robustness compared to its water-based predecessors. While a water clock needed a stable surface and was prone to spillage or evaporation, a sandglass could be carried, flipped, and generally handled with much less fuss. It didn't require refilling, and once sealed, it was largely impervious to environmental changes, save for extreme temperature fluctuations that might affect the glass itself. This made it incredibly versatile and adaptable to diverse settings, from the rocking deck of a ship to the quiet corner of a scholar's study. It truly was the everyman's timekeeper, accessible, reliable, and blessedly quiet. And unlike a water clock, if you accidentally dropped it, you only had to worry about shattered glass and a pile of sand, not a miniature flood. Small mercies, you know? So, as you listen to the soft, almost imperceptible whisper of time slipping away, remember the sandglass. It's a testament to human ingenuity, taking something as simple as falling sand and transforming it into a precise, practical, and remarkably enduring instrument for measuring the flow of moments. It wasn't flashy, it didn't have gears or alarms, but it did its job with quiet dignity, helping humanity navigate not just the oceans, but also the more subtle currents of daily life. Now, you've dipped your toes into the gentle flow of water and felt the fine grains of sand slip through your fingers, each a testament to humanity's relentless quest to conquer the elusive beast of time. But as you ponder these ancient marvels, you might find yourself in a quiet, contemplative mood, much like an ancient philosopher deciding between a really long scroll and a slightly less long scroll. Which one, you ask with a sleepy yawn, was truly the champion of the ancient timepiece arena? Let's lay them out side by side and watch them duke it out in a purely theoretical, incredibly slow-motion battle of the ages. First, let's consider the grand old water clock, the Clepsydra. Its advantages are quite literally fluid. For starters, water clocks could be designed to measure much longer durations without constant intervention. Imagine a giant reservoir, slowly, inexorably emptying over an entire day, or even longer. You wouldn't need to flip it every hour like a tiny hourglass. This made them ideal for public timekeeping, where a consistent, long-term measurement was required without someone constantly fussing over it. You could set it up in the town square, and everyone, from the baker to the busy senator, would know roughly what time it was, give or take a few drips. This inherent capacity for extended operation meant that water clocks were the go-to for serious, official timekeeping. They were the original set-it-and-forget-it devices, provided you remembered to refill the reservoir eventually. It was like having a slow-motion waterfall in your living room, only instead of a soothing sound, it was measuring your life away. Furthermore, water clocks offered a pathway to greater mechanical sophistication. As you've already seen, the Greeks and Romans, those clever chaps, figured out how to integrate gears, floats, and even alarm systems. You could have figures moving, bells ringing, or even little stone balls dropping at precise intervals. This made them not just time-measuring devices, but also impressive automated displays of engineering prowess. Imagine the gasps of awe as a tiny bronze owl hooted on the hour, powered by nothing but the steady descent of water. Try getting a pile of sand to do that, you'd just end up with a very sandy owl. This potential for complex automation meant water clocks could perform functions far beyond simple timekeeping, acting as astronomical instruments, judicial timers, or even, in the most elaborate cases, as proto-robots designed to entertain. The ability to manipulate the flow and harness its energy for other purposes gave water clocks a significant edge in terms of multifunctionality. However, the noble water clock wasn't without its Achilles heel, or perhaps, its frozen spigot. Its biggest drawback was its susceptibility to temperature. In colder climates, water freezes. And when water freezes, it stops dripping. Suddenly, your sophisticated timekeeper becomes a very expensive, very useless block of ice. Try telling the ancient Roman general that the battle starts at dawn, but only if it doesn't get too chilly tonight. It was a deal-breaker for many regions. Another significant hurdle was evaporation. In hot, arid climates, your precious water could simply vanish into thin air, leaving you with an empty clock and a very confused sense of time. It's like trying to measure your coffee consumption with a leaky cup in the desert. You're going to lose a lot of data. You also had to contend with the water source itself. It needed to be clean, free of sediment or algae that could clog the tiny orifice and throw off the flow rate. Imagine the ancient equivalent of calling tech support because your clock's got a case of the green slime. Maintaining that precise, consistent flow was a constant battle, requiring meticulous design and frequent cleaning. Plus, they were generally bulky, heavy, and not exactly pocket-friendly. You wouldn't just casually stroll down to the market with a Clepsydra tucked under your arm, unless you were trying to impress someone with your upper body strength and your commitment to accurate time. Now, let's turn our attention to the unsung hero of portability and simplicity, the Sandglass. Its advantages are beautifully straightforward. First and foremost, sand doesn't freeze or evaporate. You could take it to the Arctic or the Sahara, and it would keep doing its thing reliably, unbothered by the elements. This made it incredibly versatile for travel and use in diverse climates. It was the original rugged timepiece, built to withstand the rigors of ancient life. Secondly, sandglasses were compact and portable. You could carry them, hang them, or place them almost anywhere. This made them perfect for personal use, for timing-specific tasks, or for use in environments where space was limited, like the cramped quarters of a ship. This portability was a game-changer, democratizing timekeeping in a way the grand, stationary water clocks never could. Furthermore, their simplicity meant they were far more robust and less prone to mechanical failure. There were no gears to jam, no floats to stick, no delicate mechanisms to break. Just two glass bulbs and a narrow neck. This made them incredibly durable and easy to manufacture, requiring less specialized skill than the intricate water clocks. You could probably even make one in your garage if you had enough determination and a very steady hand. This led to their widespread adoption in the medieval period, particularly among those who needed reliable time without the fuss. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of the Sandglass contributed more to its widespread adoption than the inherent accuracy challenges. You also didn't need a constant water supply, which, believe it or not, was a pretty big deal before indoor plumbing became standard. No more fetching buckets of water just to tell the time. However, the Sandglass had its own set of limitations. This primary drawback was its fixed, short duration. Once the sand ran out, you had to flip it, and flip it again, and again. If you needed to measure an entire day, you'd be a human Sandglass flipper, which sounds like a fun job for about 5 minutes, then quickly becomes tedious. It's like having a timer that only goes up to 3 minutes for your entire life. Guess I'll just keep flipping this thing until I'm 80. This made them unsuitable for long-term, continuous timekeeping. Another issue was accuracy. The flow rate of sand could be affected by several factors: the quality and consistency of the sand grains, too fine, too coarse, too humid, the wear and tear on the orifice over time, and even static electricity. A quirky tidbit: Ancient glassmakers sometimes used finely ground eggshells or marble dust instead of pure sand, believing these materials flowed more consistently, or perhaps just because they ran out of beach. Imagine trying to calibrate your clock with powdered eggshells. The sand could also compact over time, slowing the flow. So, while seemingly simple, achieving true precision with a sandglass was an art form in itself. You couldn't easily integrate complex mechanisms like alarms or automated displays. It was a one-trick pony, albeit a very reliable trick. So, when you ponder the distinct advantages and drawbacks, you see that water clocks and sandglasses were each suited for very different needs. Water clocks, with their potential for long durations and mechanical complexity, were the titans of public timekeeping. They were the municipal clocks, the scientific instruments, the impressive displays of power and precision in ancient cities and observatories. They were the smartwatches of their day, capable of doing more than just telling time, if you had the infrastructure to support them. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greeks, like the famed Ktesibios of Alexandria, engineered incredibly sophisticated water clocks that not only told time but also animated figures and chimed bells, serving as public utilities and scientific marvels. Sandglasses, on the other hand, were the humble, dependable workhorses of personal and practical timekeeping. They were the kitchen timers, the sermon timers, the navigation tools on ships where every minute counted in charting a course across the vast, unforgiving ocean. They were the portable, robust solutions for specific, shorter tasks, where simplicity and resilience trumped fancy features. You'd find them in the hands of monks, sailors, and even cooks, timing their bread. They were the reliable, no-frills digital watches of their era, always there when you needed a quick, easy measurement, no matter the conditions. In essence, if you needed to tell an entire city when to wake up, you built a water clock. If you needed to know when your eggs were done, or when the next shift on watch was, you reached for a sandglass. Each, in its own way, played a crucial role in shaping humanity's relationship with time, laying the groundwork for the intricate devices we carry in our pockets today. You drift now, gently, like the fine grains we've been discussing, into the heart of the medieval period. The clatter of ancient gears and the whisper of flowing water begin to recede, replaced by a different, more subtle sound, the hushed, consistent cascade of sand. It's here, in the bustling, often chaotic world of the Middle Ages, that the sandglass truly finds its stride, emerging not just as a clever invention, but as an indispensable, omnipresent tool, woven into the very fabric of daily life. Imagine yourself in a medieval monastery, the air thick with the scent of old parchment and beeswax. You're not just a casual observer. You're perhaps a novice, rising before dawn, or a seasoned monk, dedicated to the strict rhythm of the monastic day. Here, time isn't just a concept. It's a sacred discipline. The canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline dictate every moment, from prayer and study to manual labor and rest. Sundials, of course, were useless in the dim light of early morning or deep into the night. Water clocks, while advanced, required constant attention, refilling, and careful maintenance, a potential distraction from spiritual duties. But the sandglass? The sandglass was a revelation. You can almost hear it now, the soft, ceaseless whisper of sand flowing from the upper bulb to the lower, marking the passing of an hour, or perhaps half an hour, or even just 15 minutes. A small, wooden-framed sandglass sits on the refectory table, ensuring that the sermon doesn't drone on for too long. A mercy for even the most devout listeners, you might agree. In the scriptorium, another marks the focused hours of copying manuscripts, ensuring that the scribes maintain their concentration without losing track of the precious daylight hours available for such intricate work. It was simple, reliable, and crucially, required no water source, no intricate plumbing, and was far less prone to freezing in the chill of a stone cloister during winter. This robust simplicity meant it could be found almost anywhere, becoming the silent, steadfast companion to countless medieval souls. Now, shift your gaze from the quiet contemplation of the monastery to the tumultuous, unpredictable expanse of the open sea. Here, on the rolling deck of a medieval cog or carrack, under the vast, indifferent sky, the sandglass wasn't merely useful. It was an absolute necessity for survival. You're part of the crew, perhaps on a long voyage across treacherous waters. Maintaining a ship's course, tracking its speed, and, most critically, dividing the watches among the crew, all relied on precise timekeeping. A watch, typically 4 hours, would be marked by the turning of a half-hour sandglass 8 times. Imagine the lookout, perched high above, constantly vigilant, periodically glancing down at the ship's master or a designated crewmate who would turn the sandglass, marking each half-hour with a call or the striking of a bell. This maritime use of the sandglass is perhaps its most famous and certainly one of its most critical applications. Without it, celestial navigation, calculating latitude based on the sun's height at noon or the position of stars, would have been far less accurate, if not impossible. You couldn't exactly bring a delicate water clock onto a pitching, rolling ship, could you? One rogue wave, and suddenly your precise timekeeping device becomes a rather ineffective, soggy ornament. The sandglass, however, was impervious to the ship's motion, within reason, of course. A truly violent storm might still send it tumbling, unaffected by temperature extremes and delightfully self-contained. It was, in essence, the GPS of its day, just with a lot more manual input. And let's be honest, trying to navigate by sun and stars alone without a reliable timer would be like trying to bake a soufflé without knowing when to take it out of the oven. Disaster almost guaranteed. Historians still debate the exact methodology medieval mariners used to calibrate their sandglasses for different latitudes and temperatures, a testament to the empirical ingenuity of the era. Beyond the sacred and the nautical, the sandglass permeated the secular world too, finding its place in the halls of justice and the chambers of academia. You might find yourself in a bustling medieval court, where legal proceedings, though often lengthy and convoluted, still required some semblance of order. Imagine a lawyer, perhaps a particularly verbose one, launching into a passionate, seemingly endless monologue. A sandglass, prominently displayed, would serve as a gentle, yet firm, reminder of allocated speaking time. When the last grain of sand dropped, your time was up. No more eloquent pleas, no more dramatic pauses, just a clear, undeniable signal that it was someone else's turn. It was a simple, elegant solution to the perennial problem of the overly enthusiastic orator, a problem, you might observe, that hasn't entirely disappeared even in our own time. One can almost picture a medieval judge, stifling a yawn, gesturing pointedly at the emptying sandglass. Time, good sir, like sand through the fingers of a particularly clumsy giant, waits for no man. In the burgeoning universities of Bologna, Paris, or Oxford, the sandglass played an equally vital role. Lectures, often delivered orally and at great length, needed structure. A professor might use a sandglass to time his lessons, ensuring he covered the necessary material within the allotted period, or to mark the duration of student examinations. Imagine the nervous energy in a dimly lit hall, the only sound the scratching of quills and the quiet trickle of sand, each falling grain a tiny reminder of the dwindling minutes. It brought a new level of precision to scholarly pursuits, allowing for standardized lecture durations and fairer examination conditions. And what about the domestic sphere? You might not think of a sandglass as a kitchen gadget, but in a world without digital timers or even spring wound clocks, it certainly filled a niche. Imagine a medieval cook, carefully tending to a simmering stew or baking bread in a wood-fired oven. The precise timing of ingredients, the duration of cooking, all were crucial for a successful meal. A small sandglass, perhaps nestled near the hearth, could be used to time the boiling of eggs, a culinary challenge even today, let's be honest, the brewing of herbal teas, or the setting of a cheese. While not as universally prevalent in every household as it was in monasteries or on ships, its presence in wealthier homes or those engaged in specific crafts would have been common. You can picture a medieval housewife muttering to herself, "Right, the bread needs 2 turns of the sandglass, or it'll be harder than a knight's conscience." Indeed, the sandglass was also a key tool for various trades and crafts. Dyers, for instance, needed to time how long fabric soaked in a particular solution to achieve the desired hue. Brewers timed the fermentation process. Apothecaries measured out periods for infusions or decoctions. Even glassmakers might have used them to time annealing processes. Its portability and independence from external factors like water supply or sunlight made it incredibly versatile. You could take it anywhere, from a bustling marketplace stall to a quiet workshop, and it would reliably perform its function. The widespread adoption of the Sandglass throughout the medieval period highlights a crucial shift in human perception of time. It moved from being an abstract, fluid concept, largely dictated by natural cycles, to something that could be quantified, measured, and, crucially, managed. This was not just about efficiency. It was about order, about discipline, and about the increasing complexity of a society that needed to synchronize its activities, whether for prayer, trade, or war. The Sandglass wasn't perfect, of course. Its accuracy depended on the quality of the sand. Fine, dry, consistent grains were key, the precision of its construction, and the diligent turning by its user. But its advantages, its simplicity, its robustness, its independence from environmental factors like freezing or evaporation, far outweighed its limitations in an era that desperately needed reliable, portable timekeeping. One quirky tidbit you might find interesting. While we often picture sandglasses with clear glass bulbs, early medieval versions might have used less transparent materials, making it harder to see the sand flow. This would have required even more diligent attention from the user, perhaps relying on sound or simply the knowledge that it needed turning after a set period. It's a subtle reminder that even simple technology has its own evolution. So, as you reflect on the medieval period, don't just imagine knights in shining armor or grand cathedrals. Picture also the humble, yet incredibly powerful Sandglass, sitting quietly in a corner. Its steady, ceaseless flow a constant, gentle reminder of time's relentless march. It wasn't just a device. It was a cornerstone of daily life, shaping routines, enabling commerce, and guiding voyages, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most profound. And so, as the gentle hum of our shared history settles, you find yourself at the very precipice of a profound realization. The quiet drip of water, the steady trickle of sand, these weren't just ancient curiosities. Oh no, my sleepy friend. These were the fundamental blueprints, the whispered secrets, that laid the very foundation for the dazzlingly complex, hyper-accurate timepieces that now adorn our wrists, our walls, and even the tiny screens in our pockets. It's like discovering that your super sleek, voice-activated coffee maker actually descended from a clay pot heated over a campfire. Mind-blowing, right? You see, the core principle that drove the earliest clockmakers, whether they wrestled with water or sand, was the relentless pursuit of regularity. They observed that water, given the right conditions, drips at a remarkably consistent rate. They noticed that sand, when flowing through a narrow aperture, measures out a repeatable duration. This isn't just a quirky observation. It's the very bedrock of all modern timekeeping. Think about it. A pendulum clock swings because of gravity's consistent pull. A quartz watch vibrates because of the precise, unwavering oscillation of a crystal. An atomic clock, the grand champion of precision, counts the perfectly regular oscillations of an atom. Each of these marvels, in its own hyper-advanced way, is simply a sophisticated evolution of the same ancient quest. Find a dependable, repeatable physical phenomenon and harness it to mark the relentless march of time. Consider the challenges they faced with those early clepsydras, those beautiful, often temperamental water clocks. Maintaining a consistent flow rate was their Mount Everest, their Rubik's Cube of ancient engineering. They experimented with conical shapes, with overflow tanks, with clever siphons and floats. They were, in essence, calibrating, regulating, and fine-tuning. And what do we do with our modern clocks? We calibrate them, we regulate them, we fine-tune them. We even set them to atomic standards, which is basically the universe's most expensive and least sarcastic water level indicator. The spirit of that painstaking regulation, the desire to eliminate even the slightest deviation, is directly inherited from those ancient engineers who probably spent sleepless nights worrying about a single stubborn water droplet. Then there's the concept of dividing time. Before the clepsydra, time was often measured in vague terms, at sunrise, midday, when the shadows are long. But a water clock, with its steady, measurable depletion, forced the issue. It introduced the idea of equal units of time, of hours that were consistently the same length, regardless of the season or the sun's whims. This might seem obvious to us now, but it was a revolutionary conceptual leap. It allowed for scheduling, for planning, for a shared understanding of when things would happen. Historians still argue whether the concept of uniform hours truly took hold across different cultures at the same pace, but the water clock certainly pushed the envelope. Without that fundamental shift, you wouldn't have your meticulously planned daily schedule, your train departing precisely at 7:15 a.m., or your favorite streaming show dropping at exactly midnight PST. You'd just have sometime after dinner, before the moon is high, which admittedly sounds kind of relaxing, but terribly inefficient for modern life. And let's not forget the ingenuity that went into those more advanced water clocks, the ones the Greeks and Romans tinkered with. We talked about gears, about alarm systems, about automated figures that moved or struck gongs. These weren't just timekeepers. They were the world's first true machines designed for automation and public utility. The intricate clockwork of a modern mechanical watch with its myriad gears and springs is a direct, albeit incredibly miniaturized, descendant of those elaborate ancient mechanisms. The chiming of your grandfather clock, or the insistent beep of your phone alarm, echoes the gongs and whistles of Clepsydras designed thousands of years ago. It's a testament to the fact that humans have always wanted their devices to do more than just one thing. They wanted them to be smart, even if smart back then meant a little bird popping out to squawk the hour. Now, pivot briefly to our sandy friends, the humble hourglasses. While perhaps less precise for long durations, their genius lay in their simplicity, portability, and robust reliability. They didn't freeze in winter, they didn't evaporate in summer, and they certainly didn't need a plumbing system. The Sandglass gave us the concept of a self-contained, easily transportable timer. It became indispensable for specific, fixed durations. A sermon, a cooking time, a sailor's watch. And guess what? We still use them. Your kitchen timer, that little plastic egg timer, or even the countdown on your microwave. They all owe a conceptual debt to the Sandglass. It's the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it device, unless you forget to flip it, in which case you might end up with a very crunchy soft-boiled egg. The widespread adoption of sandglasses in the medieval period, from churches to kitchens to ships, highlights another crucial aspect: the democratization of timekeeping. While grand water clocks marked public time, sandglasses brought time measurement into individual hands. This personal control over time, the ability to measure out a specific duration for a specific task, is a direct precursor to our personal watches, stopwatches, and countdown timers. It's the difference between hearing the town clock strike noon and knowing exactly how long you have left to finish that last chapter before bed. Ultimately, the echoes of these ancient innovations reverberate through every tick, every digital display, and every synchronized network we use today. The relentless pursuit of accuracy from the water clock, the robust simplicity of the Sandglass, the drive for automation, the conceptual leap to standardized time units, these aren't just historical footnotes. They are the foundational concepts, the very DNA of modern horology. Every time you glance at a clock, you are, in a very real sense, witnessing the triumphant legacy of dripping water and flowing sand. You are seeing the culmination of millennia of human ingenuity, all stemming from that ancient desire to grasp the elusive, ever-moving river of time. It's quite astonishing, isn't it, how a simple bowl with a hole in it could lead to an atomic clock that only loses a second every 30 million years. Makes you wonder what our descendants will think of our fancy smartwatches. Doesn't it? Perhaps they'll look back and chuckle, just as we marvel at the cleverness of a simple water drip. As the echoes of ancient ingenuity begin to soften, and the long journey through time's measurement winds down, allow your mind to drift. Imagine the gentle, rhythmic drip of water, so consistent, so calming, counting out the moments in the quiet night. Feel the whisper of sand, cascading softly, marking out steady, predictable durations. These quiet movements, these patient observations, were the very first steps on a path that led us to the precise, interconnected world of time we inhabit today. Let the images fade now, the ingenious mechanisms, the clever solutions, dissolving into the peaceful darkness around you. There is no need to count, no need to measure, just the quiet assurance that time flows ever onward, guided by principles discovered long, long ago. You are safe, you are warm, and the steady rhythm of your own breath is the only clock you need right now. All the complex gears and shimmering crystals of today's world are simply a continuation of that ancient, comforting quest to understand and embrace the passage of time. Let the stories settle into the quiet corners of your mind, like soft dust motes dancing in the last rays of a setting sun. Rest easy, knowing that even the grandest inventions often begin with the simplest, most elegant ideas.